You are still performing a version of yourself that died years ago. Somewhere between childhood and now, you built a mask to survive. A way of acting, speaking, even feeling, just so the people around you would keep loving you. Carl Jung had a name for that mask. The persona, the social face you wear so the world lets you belong. It is not fake. It was necessary. A child who gets punished for being too loud learns to go quiet. A child who gets punished for having needs learns to need nothing. That mask kept you safe. But somewhere along the way, the mask stopped protecting you and started imprisoning you. You are not stuck. You are not lost. You are carrying a corpse, the corpse of the person you had to become to survive, and calling it your identity. This is happening right now, in your job, in your marriage, in the way you introduce yourself at a dinner table full of strangers. You will keep suffering in exactly the same shape until you do the one thing every instinct in you was built to resist. You have to let that old self die. Jung called the process of becoming your real self individuation. Not discovering some perfect hidden you, but building a whole person out of every part you were taught to hide. Because underneath the mask is what Jung called the shadow, everything about you that got rejected, punished, or shamed until you buried it. Your anger, your ambition, your need, your softness. All of it sealed away so the mask could stay clean and acceptable. And here is what almost nobody tells you. You cannot become whole by adding more to the mask. You become whole by letting the mask die so what's underneath can finally breathe. This is not a metaphor for self-improvement. This is closer to a death. And like every real death, part of you is going to fight it with everything it has. The mask doesn't look the same for everyone, and that's exactly why so many people miss it in themselves. For some, it's the achiever, the one who learned that love arrives attached to accomplishment, so they turn their entire life into a resume, terrified of what would be left if they ever stopped producing. For others, it's the peacekeeper, the one who learned that conflict meant abandonment, so they became fluent in absorbing everyone else's anger just to keep the room calm, at the cost of ever expressing their own. For others still, it's the entertainer, the one who learned that being fun, easy, and low maintenance was the entry fee for being included, so they built an entire personality around never being a burden. And for some, it's quieter than all of that, the invisible one who learned early that needing anything at all was dangerous, so they disappeared instead, mistaking their own low-maintenance silence for independence. Different masks. Same architecture underneath. A child adapts to whatever kept them safest, and an adult keeps performing that adaptation decades after the danger that required it is long gone. Think about the version of you that got approval first, the good student, the easy child, the one who never made things difficult. That version worked. It got you love or something that looked close enough to love that you stopped checking the difference. So your mind did what minds do. It filed that identity as the one that keeps you safe, and it has been defending it ever since, even now, even when it's the very thing exhausting you. This is not stupidity. This is not weakness. This is a survival mechanism doing exactly what it was built to do, years after the danger it was built for has already passed. Jung would say your persona, that protective mask, was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to get a child through a world too big and too dangerous to face without armor. But nobody ever told you to take the armor off once you were an adult standing in a world you could actually survive without it. So you kept adding to it instead. A more impressive job title. A more agreeable personality. A more convincing performance of having it all together. Every year the mask got heavier, and every year you mistook the weight for identity. Here is the cost nobody shows you in the highlight reel of personal growth. You start rehearsing conversations before you have them, editing yourself in real time, calculating which version of you is safest to bring into the room. You feel a flash of anger at something small, a comment, a tone, a slight, and you swallow it before it even reaches your face because the old rule still runs in the background: do not be too much. You say yes to things your whole body is screaming no to, because the mask was built on being agreeable, and disagreement feels like the one thing that could get you rejected all over again. You laugh at jokes that don't land for you. You nod at plans you don't want. You perform enthusiasm for a life that, if you're honest with yourself for even 4 seconds, feels like it belongs to someone else. And the exhausting part isn't the performing. The exhausting part is that you can't remember when you stopped noticing you were doing it. This is what Jung meant when he warned that living entirely through the persona means losing touch with who you actually are underneath it. The mask becomes so convincing that even you start believing it's your face. Not a costume anymore. A cage with your name on it. And the strange, cruel joke of it is this: The very persona that once kept you safe is now the thing standing between you and the life you actually want. Think about the specific relationships built around your old mask, because those are the ones that will feel the change first and hardest. The friend who only calls when they need the version of you that always says yes. The family member who introduces you by the role you played 20 years ago, as if you froze in place the moment you left home. The partner who fell in love with the agreeable, low-maintenance, endlessly accommodating you, and who has never actually met the person underneath because you made sure they never had to. None of these people are villains. Most of them love an honest, working memory of you. The problem is that memory was built on a performance, and performances, by definition, cannot stay in character forever. So when the mask starts to slip, when you say no for the first time in years, when you stop absorbing blame that was never yours, when you go quiet instead of managing everyone else's comfort, the people closest to the old you will feel it as a betrayal, even though nothing was taken from them that was ever truly yours to give away. You built armor to survive a war that ended a long time ago, and you never got the memo to take it off. If any part of what you just heard landed somewhere real in you, don't scroll past it. That recognition is the beginning of the work, so hit like and stay with me because the next part explains something most people never let themselves see. Because underneath that exhaustion is a question your mind has been avoiding for years. If you stopped performing this version of yourself tomorrow, who exactly would be left standing? Here is how you know that question is no longer theoretical. The old version of you is already dying, whether you've agreed to it or not. You feel a strange flatness in moments that used to mean something. A promotion, a compliment, a milestone you used to chase, and none of it lands the way it's supposed to. You get irritated by small, specific things, a tone of voice, a request, a text message, and the irritation feels disproportionate because it's not really about the small thing at all. You catch yourself mid-sentence, performing warmth you don't feel, saying, "I'm fine," with a fluency that used to be comforting and now feels like static. Jung had a specific word for the exact places where this old identity is most fiercely defended. He called them complexes, emotionally charged knots, usually formed early, that hijack your reactions long before conscious thought has a chance to catch up. This is why a comment that should barely register can flatten you for an entire afternoon. This is why a specific tone of voice from a specific kind of person can turn you, instantly, into a much younger and much more frightened version of yourself. You are not overreacting. You are colliding with the exact wound the old persona was built to protect, and every time you protect it instead of looking directly at it, you reinforce the very cage you're trying to leave. This is also why willpower alone rarely finishes this process. You cannot out-discipline a complex. You can only see it clearly enough that it stops running you automatically, which is uncomfortable, slow, and offers no shortcuts no matter how many books promise otherwise. This is not burnout in the way people casually use that word. This is what happens when the unconscious has already finished grieving a version of you that the conscious mind refuses to bury. Jung believed the unconscious moves first. It registers what no longer fits long before the ego catches up, which is why the emptiness always arrives before the explanation does. You don't feel lost because something is wrong with you. You feel lost because something in you has already ended, and the rest of you hasn't been told yet. And this is exactly where most people make the mistake that keeps them stuck for years. They interpret the emptiness as a problem to fix. A new hobby, a new job, a new relationship, a new haircut, instead of a message to listen to. So they patch the old identity instead of letting it go, and the flatness comes back within months, because you cannot renovate a house that was condemned. You'll notice it most in the places designed to reward the old performance the loudest. Scrolling through a feed full of curated versions of people you know, feeling a hollow comparison you can't quite name because you're not envying their life, you're envying how convincingly they still seem to believe their own performance. Sitting in a meeting, saying the agreeable thing, and catching a half-second delay before your own voice, like you're translating yourself from a language you no longer fully speak. These aren't small glitches to optimize away. They're the exact seams where the old identity is fraying, showing you precisely where the mask no longer fits the person now wearing it. Here is the part that explains why this feels less like sadness and more like fear. Your ego, the part of you that manages daily identity, the I you call yourself, treats the death of that old persona as a literal threat to survival. Not metaphorically. The ego does not know the difference between I am changing and I am disappearing, so it defends the old identity with everything it has, even when that identity is the very thing making you miserable. This is why you rationalize staying in the job that hollows you out. This is why you keep explaining away the relationship that requires you to keep performing a self you no longer are. This is why just push through it feels safer than admitting the foundation itself has cracked. None of this is weakness. This is your ego doing exactly what egos are built to do: protect a known identity over an unknown one, even when the known one is killing you slowly and the unknown one is simply you. The resistance you feel is not a character flaw. It is the oldest, most loyal part of your psyche trying to keep you alive using the only method it has ever known. But loyalty to a dead thing is still loyalty to a dead thing. And the longer the ego fights this particular death, the longer you stay exactly where you are. Not living, not fully dying either, just suspended in a version of yourself that has already stopped working but hasn't been allowed to leave. There is a name for this suspended state, and once you hear it, you will start noticing it everywhere in your own life. This is the space Jung called the space before rebirth, where the old structure has collapsed internally but the new one hasn't been built yet, and it feels less like growth and more like standing in the dark with nothing solid under your feet. Nobody warns you that this part comes before the relief, not after it. So you sit in that dark, mistaking the absence of the old you for the absence of a self entirely, when really something is finally being cleared to make room. So if the old mask is dying and the ego is fighting to keep it alive, what actually fills the space once it's gone? This is where most self-help advice quietly fails you, because it tells you to let go and move forward, as if the old self simply evaporates and a better one appears on its own. Jung said something far less comfortable. What you rejected doesn't disappear when you bury it, it goes underground and waits. He called this buried material the shadow, every trait, urge, and truth about you that got labeled unacceptable, so you disowned it just to keep the mask presentable. Your anger got relabeled, not being a team player. Your ambition got relabeled, too much. Your grief got relabeled, dwelling on the past. None of it left. It went into storage, and it has been running your life from the basement ever since, showing up as the outburst that seems to come from nowhere, the envy you can't explain, the exhaustion that has no obvious cause. Here is the part that changes everything once you actually understand it. You cannot become whole by continuing to reject those parts, and you cannot become whole by simply replacing an old mask with a nicer-looking new one either. That's not individuation. That's redecorating a cage. Jung was careful to point out that individuation is not a weekend project or a single dramatic breakthrough. He described it as a lifelong process, one that never fully finishes, because the self, the whole and integrated personality he believed every person is unconsciously moving toward, is a horizon, not a destination you arrive at and then stop. That should be a relief, not a disappointment. It means you don't have to integrate every buried piece of yourself before you're allowed to start living differently. It means the goal was never a finished, perfected version of you standing on the other side of this. The goal is a more honest relationship with the parts of yourself you spent years disowning. This is also why Jung insisted that confronting the shadow requires real courage, not casual curiosity, because you are not examining a flaw to be fixed. You are meeting a part of yourself that was exiled for being unacceptable, and inviting it back and changes how you see everything you built without it. This is close to the core warning running through Jung's entire body of work, that whatever stays unconscious in you doesn't disappear, it keeps steering your choices from the dark, and you end up mistaking that steering for your own personality, or worse, for fate. That's exactly what's been happening to you, mistaking an old, buried pattern for who you simply are, when it was never fate at all, only an unexamined room in a house you've been living in your entire life. Real individuation, as Jung described it, means integrating the shadow, not acting out every buried impulse and not pretending it isn't there, but finally admitting it belongs to you, and letting it inform who you become instead of secretly running you from underground. This is why so much of what passes for personal growth quietly fails. A new morning routine cannot integrate your shadow. A new job title cannot integrate your shadow. A more polished, more disciplined, more put-together version of your old persona is still just the persona, a better costume on the same unresolved corpse. You can spend 10 years optimizing the mask and still wake up feeling like a stranger in your own life, because you optimized the wrong thing. The buried anger you called unprofessional might actually be the boundary you never let yourself have. The buried ambition you called too much might be the exact thing standing between you and the life you keep saying you want. The buried grief you called moving on too slowly might be the only honest thing left in you, patiently waiting for you to stop performing fine. This is uncomfortable to hear because it means the parts of yourself you spent the most energy hiding are often the parts most necessary for you to actually live. Not act out. Not weaponize. Integrate, bring into the light, own consciously, and let shape a fuller version of who you are, instead of a hidden version running you from the dark. And here is the distinction that determines whether any of this leads anywhere real. Cosmetic change adjusts behavior while leaving the underlying structure untouched, and it always, eventually, snaps back to where it started. Individuation rebuilds the structure itself, which means it costs more, takes longer, and cannot be faked with a new haircut or a 30-day challenge. Cosmetic change asks, how do I perform better within who I already am? Individuation asks a far more dangerous question. Who am I, underneath everyone I've had to become? One of those questions keeps your mask intact. The other one requires you to let it die. Here is what integration actually looks like in an ordinary week, because it's far less dramatic than the word suggests. It's noticing the anger before you swallow it, and instead of performing calm, saying the honest sentence you would have edited out a year ago. It's noticing the old pull to say yes automatically, and pausing just long enough to ask whether you actually want to before your mouth answers for you. It's sitting with the discomfort of disappointing someone, instead of immediately managing their reaction the way the old mask always did. None of that requires a dramatic reinvention. It requires choosing, again and again, in small ordinary moments, to respond from the whole self instead of the old performance, which is precisely why individuation is slow and precisely why it lasts. Picture the specific moment this usually arrives, because it rarely announces itself with fireworks. It's a Tuesday. You're doing something completely ordinary, sitting in a meeting, listening to a family member, standing in your own kitchen, and a thought surfaces that you cannot unthink. I don't know who I am when nobody is watching. Not a dramatic collapse. Just a quiet, unbearable clarity. You start noticing how much of your life was built to be witnessed. The career chosen partly for how it sounds out loud, the relationship maintained partly for how it looks from the outside, the opinions rehearsed for approval before you even know what you actually think. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. This is the moment the old persona stops being useful and starts being unbearable, because now you know it's a performance and you cannot go back to not knowing. This is where it usually breaks, not loudly but completely. Maybe it's a relationship that only ever worked because you kept performing the agreeable version of yourself, and the day you stop performing, it goes quiet in a way that tells you everything. Maybe it's the job you built your entire identity around, and one ordinary afternoon you realize you feel nothing when you used to feel pride, and the nothing is the most honest emotion you've had in years. Maybe it's simpler than either of those, a conversation with someone who has known the old you for decades, and for the first time you cannot perform that version convincingly enough to satisfy them, and you watch their face register the loss of someone who, technically, is still standing right in front of them. That moment is not a failure. That moment is the funeral you never let yourself have. Everyone around you will read it differently. They will call it a phase, a crisis, a shame, a disappointment, because they built their understanding of you on the mask, and the mask is exactly what's dying. Let them. Their discomfort is not evidence that you're doing something wrong. Their discomfort is evidence that you're doing something real. You are not betraying the people who loved the old you. You are finally stopping the betrayal of the self who had to disappear so the old you could exist in the first place. Here is what nobody tells you about that particular silence. It is not empty. It is the sound of a system recalibrating, the people around you quietly deciding whether they love the person underneath the mask, or whether they only ever loved the performance. Some of them will surprise you and stay curious about who you're actually becoming. Some of them will drift, and that drifting will hurt in a way that feels disproportionate to how little the old version of you actually needed them. Both outcomes are information, not verdicts. Neither one means you did this wrong. The people who can only love the mask were never loving you in the first place. They were loving a performance you built to keep them close, and mourning that loss is real, even when it's also, quietly, a form of relief. You do not owe anyone the corpse of who you used to be, just so they can keep recognizing you at a glance. This is the exact fork in the road where most people turn back. Not because turning back is easier, but because it's familiar, and familiar has always felt safer than true, even when familiar has been quietly killing you for years. You do not have to turn back. You are allowed to let the funeral finish. Remember the person at that dinner table, performing a self they didn't recognize anymore? That person is not gone because something broke in them. That person is gone because something in them finally finished. A version built for survival, released now that survival is no longer the only thing available to them. This is not collapse. This is not failure or coldness, or some quiet cruelty toward the people who love the old mask. This is Jung's individuation doing exactly what it was always meant to do, not adding a better performance on top of the old one, but clearing enough space for an actual self to finally stand up. You are not becoming someone new. You are becoming someone accurate. You stop performing agreement you don't feel. You stop explaining yourself to people who only ever wanted the mask. You stop mistaking exhaustion for identity, and constant self-monitoring for personality. You start noticing anger and treating it as information instead of a threat. You start wanting things out loud instead of translating every desire into something smaller and safer. You start recognizing silence, stillness, even other people's discomfort, as proof that something real finally has room to exist. None of this makes you cold. None of this makes you superior to the people still wearing their mask because you wore yours for decades, and some days, under enough pressure, you will still reach for it out of habit. That's not failure either. That's just what it looks like to be human and still becoming. The old you had to die so this version of you could finally breathe, not the polished version, not the impressive version, the accurate one. The one built without an audience. The one that doesn't perform, doesn't apologize for existing, and doesn't need the mask's approval to know it's real. You are not obligated to keep performing a self that already finished its job. You are not required to explain this transformation to anyone who only ever wanted the easier version of you. You are not late, and you are not broken, and you are not starting over from nothing. You are finally starting from the truth. The mask carried you as far as it could. It kept a frightened child safe long enough to become an adult who no longer needs that particular armor. That was its purpose, and it fulfilled it, and purposes that have been fulfilled are allowed to end. If you felt any part of your own funeral inside this video, say it plainly in the comments with one word: reborn, because that word means you're no longer defending a version of yourself that already died, and you're not the only one sitting in that particular silence tonight.